Part 1. Arriving in Sweden. First impressions. The first time I landed in Stockholm, it was early October. The sky had that particular Nordic gray to it, like someone had stretched a sheet of pale silver across the entire horizon. The air smelled clean, in a way that cities almost never smell clean. Not like pine trees or countryside, just genuinely, deeply clean, as if the atmosphere itself had been quietly maintained by very responsible people for several centuries. Which, honestly, is basically what happened. Arlanda Airport is efficient in a way that feels slightly surreal if you're coming from somewhere more chaotic. Everything is labeled. Everything functions. The train into the city center runs on time to the minute, and when you step off at Stockholm Central Station, you are immediately dropped into one of the most visually striking capital cities in the entire world. Stockholm is built across 14 islands. The Old Town, Gamla stan, has streets so narrow and cobblestones so ancient that you half expect a Viking to turn the corner and ask for directions. But what you actually encounter, over and over again, are Swedes going about their daily lives with this particular quality that I can only describe as effortless composure. They are not rushing. They are not performing. They are just living. And somehow they make living look extremely good. Now, I want to be careful here because I've made the mistake in other videos of reducing entire populations to a single quality, and that's not what this is. But there is something genuinely striking about the physical appearance of people in Sweden, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. So let's actually talk about it, and let's talk about why. Part 2. The Swedish woman. Who she actually is here is what most travel content gets wrong about Swedish women. They spend about 30 seconds describing what they look like, and 0 seconds describing who they are. And who they are is infinitely more interesting than what they look like, even though what they look like is already very interesting. The Swedish woman, and I'm speaking in general cultural tendencies here, obviously every individual is their own universe, is someone who grew up in a society that made a series of very deliberate decisions about how to treat people. Sweden has had some of the strongest gender equality policies in the world for decades. Parental leave is shared between parents. Women have been in leadership positions across business, government, and culture for generations. This is not a country where women are waiting to be given permission to exist fully. They already exist fully. They have for a long time. What this produces, culturally, is a woman who tends to be extraordinarily self-possessed. She knows what she wants. She will tell you what she thinks. She is not performing femininity for your approval, and she is not particularly interested in performing anything for anyone. There is a concept in Swedish culture called lagom, which translates roughly to just the right amount. And while it applies to everything from how much sugar you put in your coffee to how loudly you talk on public transportation, it also shapes a kind of social personality that is measured, balanced, and quietly confident. Swedish women tend to be highly educated. Sweden consistently ranks among the top countries in the world for female university enrollment. They tend to be financially independent, often from a relatively young age. They tend to have very clear ideas about work-life balance because Sweden as a culture genuinely values it. People actually leave work at 5 o'clock. People actually take their 5 weeks of vacation. People actually prioritize their health and their time outdoors, and this lifestyle shows. And that, I think, is the real answer to the question everyone is secretly asking when they click on a video like this. Why do Swedish women look the way they look? It is not magic. It is not genetics alone, though genetics certainly play a role. It is a combination of a lifestyle that prioritizes sleep, outdoor activity, clean eating, not in an obsessive way, but in a normalized, cultural way, and a societal structure that reduces chronic stress. When you live in a country with universal healthcare, strong social safety nets, protected vacation time, and genuine gender equality, you carry less tension in your body, and that shows on your face. That shows in how you walk. That shows in everything. Part 3. What Swedish women actually look like. The real breakdown. Okay, let's be honest, because you came for this part too, and there is nothing wrong with appreciating beauty. The stereotypical image of the Swedish woman, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, strong features, is not inaccurate, but it is incomplete. Sweden has been one of the most welcoming countries in Europe for immigration, particularly over the last few decades, which means that modern Swedish women represent a genuinely diverse range of appearances. Stockholm, especially, is a cosmopolitan city, and the women you encounter there reflect that. That said, the Nordic physical type is absolutely real, and it is absolutely everywhere. There is something about the combination of high cheekbones, fair skin, light eyes, and that particular Nordic bone structure that creates a face that photographs beautifully and also just looks striking in person. But what I noticed more than individual features was a quality of health. Skin that looked genuinely nourished, hair that looked genuinely cared for, not overstyled, just healthy. Bodies that looked strong and active rather than decorative. Swedish women, on average, spend a lot of time outdoors. There is a concept called friluftsliv, which translates to something like open-air life, and it is deeply embedded in Scandinavian culture. It is not unusual for a Swedish woman to go for a long run in the forest before work, take her lunch break by the water, and go for a walk in the evening regardless of the weather. There's even a saying, "There is no bad weather, only bad clothing." This relationship with nature and physical movement is part of daily life, rather than an aspirational lifestyle goal, and the effect on physical appearance is real. Fashion in Sweden tends toward a particular aesthetic that I find genuinely appealing. It is understated, but intentional. Clean lines, neutral colors, high-quality fabrics, minimal accessories. Swedish women tend not to overdress or over-accessorize. They lean into a kind of quiet elegance that communicates confidence without effort. It's the opposite of peacocking. It's anti-performance. And paradoxically, it is more attractive than almost any other approach to personal style I've encountered anywhere in the world. Part 4. The dating culture in Sweden. The truth. Now, we get to the part that every man watching this video has been waiting for, and I'm going to give it to you completely straight, because I've talked to dozens of expats, tourists, and locals about this, and the truth is nuanced and fascinating. Dating in Sweden is not like dating in Southern Europe. It is not like dating in the United States. It is genuinely its own thing, and if you arrive without understanding the cultural context, you will be very confused, and you will probably read the situation completely wrong. Swedish dating culture is famously indirect. This is not because Swedish women are cold or uninterested. It is because Swedish social culture in general avoids anything that feels like imposing on another person. Approaching a stranger in a direct, complimentary way, the way you might in Italy or Spain, can feel intrusive in Sweden. Not because the intention is bad, but because Swedish social norms operate on a different frequency. There is a very strong cultural value placed on personal space, on not being forward, on not making someone feel put on the spot. What this means practically is that a Swedish woman who is interested in you might not give you the obvious green lights you're used to. She might make extended eye contact and then look away. She might laugh at something you say and then go completely neutral again. She might give you very minimal verbal encouragement, even if she is genuinely curious about you. If you're from a culture that reads affection loudly, you will miss all of this. The most common way that Swedish people meet romantically is through mutual social circles, through apps. Tinder and Hinge are both widely used, and through activities and events they already attend. Cold approaches at bars are relatively rare and often land awkwardly. But this does not mean that Swedish women are uninterested in meeting people. It means they prefer contexts that feel natural and pressure-free. Once you are past the initial social barrier, and once there is mutual interest established, Swedish women can be extraordinarily direct. There is very little of the will she or won't she game playing that is common in other dating cultures. If she wants to see you again, she will suggest it. If she is not interested, she will not lead you on. There is a refreshing honesty to Swedish romantic culture once the ice has been broken, and that honesty comes directly from the same egalitarian cultural values we talked about earlier. She is not performing. She is not playing a role. She is just being honest with you. One thing that surprises a lot of foreign men in Sweden is that Swedish women expect equality in dating in a way that feels quite different from cultures where there are more traditional gender dynamics. paying for the first date is not automatically expected. Making plans unilaterally without consulting her is not endearing. Taking initiative is good, but it should feel like a genuine invitation rather than a declaration. The dynamic is collaborative from the very beginning, and if you are the kind of person who genuinely respects that, you will find Swedish women to be incredible partners. If you are the kind of person who needs to feel in control or dominant in a relationship, Sweden might challenge you. Part 5. Where to go and what to do. Experiencing Sweden. Like a local. Let me take you on a tour, because Sweden is not just Stockholm, and if you only see Stockholm, you are genuinely missing the country. Stockholm itself deserves several days. Beyond Gamla stan, I'd point you towards Södermalm, the neighborhood on the southern island that has the energy of a more alternative, creative Stockholm. This is where the interesting cafes are, where the design studios and vintage shops live, where you are most likely to have a spontaneous and interesting conversation with a Swede who has slightly stepped outside the reserved social norm because the entire neighborhood has a slightly more relaxed, open energy. Brunch culture in Södermalm is real, and it is wonderful. You will sit for 2 hours over coffee and a cardamom bun and feel completely at peace with the world. Then there is the archipelago. Stockholm's archipelago consists of over 30,000 islands stretching out into the Baltic Sea, and in the summer it becomes the social heartbeat of Swedish life. Swedes rent cabins on small islands. They swim in water that is genuinely cold even in July. They have long outdoor dinners that last until midnight when the sun barely sets. The archipelago in summer is one of the most beautiful places I have ever been in my life, and it is where you see Swedish people at their most relaxed, most open, and most themselves. If you go to Sweden in winter, and you should at least once, you should also consider heading north. Swedish Lapland is another planet. The kind of darkness that settles over northern Sweden in December and January is absolute, the kind of darkness you forget is possible in the modern world, and the northern lights cut through it with a violence that is genuinely emotional. People often cry when they see the northern lights for the first time. I did. There are no words adequate to the experience, so I won't try to find them. Gothenburg, Sweden's second city on the west coast, has a different character from Stockholm. It is rougher around the edges, warmer socially, deeply shaped by its industrial and maritime history. People in Gothenburg are famously friendlier than Stockholmers. This is actually a well-known cultural difference within Sweden itself, and Stockholmers will readily admit it. The food scene in Gothenburg is extraordinary. Some of Scandinavia's best seafood restaurants are here. The fish market at Feskakirka is a cathedral to shellfish, and if you eat oysters, you will eat the best of your life here. Malmö, in the south, is the most culturally diverse city in Sweden and has an urban energy that feels different again. Connected to Copenhagen by the Öresund Bridge, Malmö has a younger, more international, more experimental character. It's a city still figuring out its identity, and that process makes it alive and interesting. The food here is some of the most adventurous in the country. Part 6. Swedish culture, social norms, and how not to embarrass yourself. Let's talk survival, because Swedish culture has some very specific rules that are invisible to outsiders and very visible to Swedes. The queue is sacred. In no country I have ever visited is the queue taken more seriously than in Sweden. You take a number, you wait your turn, and you do not, under any circumstances, cut, skip, or even appear to be thinking about either. I have watched Swedes become genuinely visibly distressed at queue violations. Respect the queue and you are already ahead of most tourists. Personal space on public transport is another one. Stockholm's metro system is clean, efficient, and almost eerily quiet. People do not talk loudly on the metro. They often do not talk at all. If there are empty seats, you do not sit directly next to a stranger if there is an alternative. This is not coldness. This is Swedish respect for the individual. Once you understand it as an expression of consideration rather than unfriendliness, you actually find it rather civilized. Shoes off at the door is essentially universal in Swedish homes. If you are invited to someone's home, which, given the reserved nature of Swedish social culture, is actually a meaningful gesture of trust, you take your shoes off at the entrance. This is non-negotiable and non-discussable. Fika deserves its own section. Fika is the Swedish ritual of taking a coffee break with something sweet, usually a cinnamon roll or a cardamom bun, and it is not optional in Swedish culture. It is a genuine social institution. Swedish workplaces have mandated fika breaks. Friends arrange fika instead of arranging dinner. If a Swedish woman suggests fika with you, she is not suggesting a casual thing. She is inviting you into a very specific cultural ritual that is about slowing down, being present, and actually connecting. Take it seriously. Show up for fika. Fika is how Sweden maintains its social fabric. The relationship with nature that I mentioned earlier extends into something almost spiritual. Allemansrätten, the right of public access, is a law enshrined in Swedish culture and the Swedish constitution that gives every person the right to walk, camp, and move through any land in Sweden, including private property, as long as they behave respectfully and do not disturb or damage. This is an extraordinary concept. It means that Sweden belongs to everyone who is in it. You can pitch a tent in a forest that technically belongs to a private landowner, and that is your legal right as long as you leave it as you found it. This shapes a relationship between people and the natural world that is genuinely different from most of the world, and it is beautiful. Part 7. Real Conversations. What Swedes Actually Think About Foreigners. I want to share something that I think is genuinely valuable for anyone who is thinking about visiting or relocating to Sweden. And it is this: Swedes are not cold. They are reserved. These are completely different things. Cold means indifferent. Cold means unwelcoming. Cold means you are not wanted. Swedish reserve means something entirely different. It means there is a high threshold for casual social engagement with strangers. But once you are past that threshold, once you are inside someone's social circle, Swedes are warm, loyal, generous, and deeply funny. Swedish humor is dry to the point of sometimes appearing to not be humor at all, and then you realize 3 seconds later that you have just been perfectly roasted, and you will respect it immensely. The expat community in Sweden is consistent on this point. The first few months are hard. You can feel invisible. You can feel like the city is operating on a frequency you cannot access. But if you commit, if you learn even a few words of Swedish, and Swedes will absolutely appreciate the attempt even as they immediately switch to English, which virtually every Swede under 60 speaks flawlessly. If you put yourself in contexts where relationships can develop over time, rather than trying to force immediate connection, Sweden opens up in a way that is extraordinarily rewarding. Swedish women specifically, in my experience and in the experience of many expats I've spoken to, tend to appreciate foreigners who are genuinely curious about Sweden rather than foreigners who arrive with a pre-formed image of what Sweden is. The woman who becomes interesting to a Swedish woman is the one who asks real questions, who listens genuinely, who has their own point of view and is not performing for approval. Confidence without arrogance. Curiosity without projection. That is the energy that lands in Sweden. Part 8. The Lifestyle. Why Swedes are consistently among the happiest people in the world. Sweden consistently ranks among the top 10 happiest countries in the world. This is not an accident, and it is not a cliché. There are very specific structural reasons why Swedish people tend to report high levels of life satisfaction, and understanding them tells you everything about why Swedish culture produces the kind of people it produces. Universal health care removes a category of anxiety that consumes enormous psychological energy in countries without it. You do not have to choose between seeing a doctor and paying rent. That sounds simple, but the psychological freedom it creates is profound. Parental leave. Up to 480 days shared between parents, with a portion reserved specifically for each parent to encourage both mothers and fathers to take time away from work, means that the early years of raising a child are not experienced as a financial crisis. This has a direct effect on family stability, on the mental health of parents, and on the well-being of children. Work culture in Sweden genuinely values the boundary between professional and personal life. A Swedish employer who emails you at 10 at night expecting a response is considered to have poor judgment. The workday ends and personal time is personal time. This is protected not just legally, but culturally, and the effect on stress levels and personal happiness is measurable. The commitment to outdoor life, to physical activity, to natural environments, these are not wellness trends in Sweden. They are baseline expectations. The average Swede spends far more time outdoors than the average person in most other developed nations, and the research on the mental health benefits of time in nature is, at this point, overwhelming. All of this produces a population that, on average, is physically healthy, mentally stable, financially secure relative to basic needs, and embedded in a culture that values honesty, equality, and the right of every individual to live on their own terms. That is the foundation of the beauty you see when you walk down a street in Stockholm. It is a beauty that comes from living well, and it is genuinely inspiring. Part 9. Practical things. What you need to know before you go. Sweden is expensive. I want to be direct about this because I don't want you to arrive unprepared. Stockholm is consistently ranked among the most expensive cities in Europe. A coffee will cost you the equivalent of 4 to 6 euros. A meal at a mid-range restaurant will cost significantly more than you expect. Alcohol is heavily taxed, and the only place you can buy wine and spirits is at the state-run Systembolaget stores, which have limited opening hours. The way to do Sweden on a budget is to shop at supermarkets, cook when you can, and use the extraordinary public transport system rather than taxis. The metro, buses, and commuter trains in Stockholm are excellent, and a monthly transit card is very reasonable relative to the cost of alternatives. Getting a bike is even better. Stockholm is an extremely bikeable city, and cycling is how many locals choose to move around in the warmer months. The weather is a genuine factor, and I say this as someone who loves Sweden deeply. Winter in Sweden is long and dark in a way that is hard to fully appreciate until you've experienced it. If you are visiting, late spring and summer, May through August, are when Sweden is at its absolute best. The days are extraordinarily long, sometimes nearly 20 hours of daylight in the far north, and the entire country comes alive in a way that feels almost like a collective exhale after months of darkness. The energy is incredible. People are outside constantly. Spontaneous social events happen everywhere. It is genuinely one of the best places on earth to be in summer. If you are moving to Sweden, and Sweden does attract a significant number of expats for work and relationships, Swedish language classes are available for free to registered residents through a program called SFI, Swedish for Immigrants. Taking advantage of this is strongly recommended, not because you cannot function in English, you absolutely can, but because the effort of learning the language signals something important to Swedish people about your sincerity, and it will open doors that would otherwise stay closed. Part 10. What Sweden teaches you about beauty. I want to close this section with something a little more philosophical, because Sweden changed the way I think about beauty, and I think it will do the same for you. I arrived in Sweden thinking about beauty as a physical category. I was thinking about bone structure and hair color and the particular Nordic features that everybody talks about, and those things are real, and they are striking. But by the time I left, I understood beauty differently. Beauty in Sweden is systemic. It is the result of a society that decided collectively over many decades to prioritize the well-being of its people. It is the result of policies that reduce chronic stress, of a culture that protects personal time, of an environment that encourages physical activity and time in nature, of a social framework that treats women as fully equal human beings rather than decorative accessories. When you build a society like that, the people who live in it reflect it. They carry themselves differently. They move through the world with a particular ease. They look genuinely like they are okay. This is the thing that the clickbait headlines always miss. They say beautiful women and they mean cheekbones. But what they are actually reacting to, whether they know it or not, is the physical expression of a particular kind of social health. And that is something far more interesting and far more worth understanding than any single physical feature. Sweden is not perfect. No country is. There are genuine social challenges, integration issues, housing affordability in the cities, the particular loneliness that can come with a culture of high personal space. But the things Sweden gets right, it gets profoundly right. And those things show up in the people. Conclusion. If Sweden is on your list, go. Go in summer if you can. Go with genuine curiosity. Leave your expectations at the door and let the country show you what it actually is rather than what you imagined. Walk the islands of Stockholm at midnight when the sky is still pale. Eat a cinnamon bun on a bench by the water. Have a fika with someone who becomes, slowly and genuinely, your friend. Take the train north and watch the landscape change from civilized to ancient. And pay attention to the people, not just what they look like, but how they live. I'm Julia. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe because we are going a lot more places. I'll see you in the next one.